Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're embarking on a journey back in time to a period that reshaped the entire world. We're diving deep into the latter half of World War II, from the pivotal year of 1941 to its dramatic conclusion in 1945. This was a time when the conflict escalated to a truly global scale, when titans clashed, and when the course of history was decided on battlefields spanning continents and oceans. By the beginning of 1941, much of Europe was already under the shadow of the Axis powers. But the war was about to change in a way nobody could have predicted. The first major turning point came on June 22, 1941. In a move that stunned the world, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the massive invasion of the Soviet Union. This wasn't just another campaign. It was the largest land invasion in human history, involving millions of soldiers, thousands of tanks, and aircraft. The initial German advance was shockingly effective, pushing deep into Soviet territory. They laid siege to Leningrad, reached the outskirts of Moscow, and captured vast swaths of land. Hitler believed the Soviet Union would collapse like a house of cards, but he had underestimated two critical factors: the brutal Russian winter and the sheer resilience of the Soviet people. The advance ground to a halt just miles from Moscow, and the Eastern Front became a grueling, attritional war that would bleed the German army dry. While this titanic struggle raged in the East, another power was about to be drawn into the conflict, changing its very nature. For 2 years, the United States had maintained a policy of official neutrality, although it was increasingly supporting the Allied cause through programs like the Lend-Lease Act. All of that changed on a quiet Sunday morning. On December 7, 1941, naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan launched a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The attack was devastating, crippling the U.S. Pacific Fleet. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt delivered his famous Day of Infamy speech, and the United States officially declared war on Japan. In response, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, and what had been separate conflicts in Europe and Asia now merged into one single global war. The sleeping giant, as it was called, had been awakened. The year 1942 was a period of Axis ascendancy, but it also saw the seeds of their defeat being sown. In the Pacific, Japan continued its rapid expansion, conquering the Philippines, Singapore, and much of Southeast Asia. It seemed unstoppable, but the tide began to turn in the middle of the year. The Battle of the Coral Sea in May was a strategic Allied victory, halting the Japanese advance towards Australia. Then came the decisive moment. In June 1942, at the Battle of Midway, the U.S. Navy, having cracked Japanese naval codes, ambushed and sank 4 of Japan's precious aircraft carriers. It was a catastrophic blow from which the Japanese Navy would never fully recover. The initiative in the Pacific had shifted. Meanwhile, back in Europe, the Allies were preparing to open a new front. In North Africa, British and Commonwealth forces under General Bernard Montgomery delivered a crushing defeat to Rommel E's Afrika Korps at the Second Battle of El Alamein in late 1942. This victory was a huge morale boost. Shortly after, in Operation Torch, American and British forces landed in Morocco and Algeria. Caught in a pincer, the remaining Axis forces in North Africa were trapped, and by May 1943, the entire continent was cleared of Axis troops. The soft underbelly of Europe, as Churchill called it, was now exposed. The year 1943 was defined by 2 monumental struggles. In the east, the German Sixth Army, which had been besieging the city of Stalingrad, found itself encircled by a massive Soviet counteroffensive. Trapped in the freezing city, Hitler refused to allow a retreat. What followed was one of the most brutal battles in history. By February 1943, the remnants of the Sixth Army surrendered. The Battle of Stalingrad was not just a military defeat. It was a psychological catastrophe for the Axis. It proved that the German army was not invincible and marked the beginning of their long, bloody retreat from the east. Following their success in North Africa, the Allies launched an invasion of Sicily in July 1943, and then the Italian mainland. This led to the downfall of Mussolini and Italy's surrender in September. However, German forces quickly occupied the country, and the fight up the Italian peninsula turned into a slow, difficult, and costly campaign for the Allies, but it tied down significant German divisions that were desperately needed elsewhere. By 1944, the Allies were ready for the main event, the invasion of France. For years, they had been building up a colossal force of soldiers, ships, and aircraft in Britain. The operation, codenamed Overlord, was the most complex amphibious invasion ever attempted. On June 6, 1940, for D-Day, Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy. Despite facing fierce German resistance, particularly at Omaha Beach, the Allies established a beachhead. This was the beginning of the end. After breaking out of Normandy, Allied forces, led by generals like Eisenhower, Patton, and Montgomery, liberated Paris in August and swept across France and Belgium, pushing the Germans back towards their own border. But the German war machine had one last, desperate gamble left. In December 1944, they launched a surprise offensive through the Ardennes forest in what became known as the Battle of the Bulge. The initial attack caught the Allies by surprise, creating a large bulge in their lines. The heroic defense by surrounded American troops at places like Bastogne, famously summarized by the single word reply nuts to a surrender demand, held the line. Eventually, Allied air power and counterattacks threw the Germans back. They had spent their last reserves, and the path to Germany was now open from the west. The final year, 1945, saw the Allied powers closing in from all sides. In the east, the Soviet Red Army launched a massive winter offensive, smashing through German lines and advancing on Berlin. In the west, the Allies crossed the Rhine River in March. The end was near. On April 30th, with Soviet troops just blocks away from his bunker in Berlin, Adolf Hitler took his own life. A week later, on May 8, 1945, Germany unconditionally surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Victory in Europe Day, or VE Day, was celebrated around the world, but the global conflict was not yet finished. In the Pacific, the fight against Japan had been a brutal island-hopping campaign. U.S. forces fought bloody battles for islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, inching ever closer to the Japanese mainland. The ferocity of the Japanese resistance, including the use of kamikaze pilots, suggested that an invasion of Japan would cost millions of lives on both sides. Faced with this grim prospect, the new U.S. President Harry Truman made one of the most controversial decisions in history. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. The devastation was unprecedented. Faced with this new, terrifying weapon and a Soviet invasion of Manchuria, Japan announced its surrender on August 15. The formal surrender was signed on September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, finally bringing World War II to a close. The war had lasted 6 years and resulted in an estimated 70 to 85 million casualties, making it the deadliest conflict in human history. It left continents in ruins but also gave birth to a new world. The old European empires crumbled. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as rival superpowers, and institutions like the United Nations were created in the hope of preventing such a catastrophe from ever happening again. The years from 1941 to 1945 were a crucible that forged the modern world, a period of immense sacrifice and heroism that we must never forget. Thank you so much for joining me on this historical journey today. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into history. Let me know in the comments what part of this era you find most fascinating. Until next time, stay curious.